Our first guest that we're having up tonight, I found so interesting, is Daniel P. Douglas. Dan is a U.S. Army veteran who has also served as a senior analyst in the U.S. intelligence community, a long-term civil servant with degrees in political science and Russian area studies. Dan has also worked in the museum profession. His travels have taken him throughout the United States, Mexico, Europe, and the Middle East, and the Caribbean. As an author, Dan creates epic tales of the past, present, and future with the most unlikely heroes and calls upon them to join extraordinary and mysterious struggles. His characters' sometimes reluctant choices and actions put them on a collision course with destiny and reveal unimaginable truths. He was born and raised in Southern California. Dan's also lived in Virginia and Arizona. He now resides in New Mexico with his spouse, children, siblings, parents, pets, and livestock, and enjoys reading science fiction books and conspiracy thrillers as much as writing them. His latest book is called Truth Insurrected, The St. Mary Project. His website is danielpdouglas.com. Without any further delay, let's get him on the line. Dan, good evening. Welcome to K-Talk and the Fringe Radio Show, my friend.
Well, hi, Pat. How are you?
I am doing good, enjoying the beautiful weather.
It is very nice. It's also pretty nice here in Albuquerque. Can't complain. Although I have to say, I do miss a little bit of the rain and snow and such that they're getting back east. I spent some time back there, and winter is winter, and I kind of like to have that, but can't complain.
Oh, I know. Well, I'm a Chicago native, Dan, and I'll tell you, the younger you are, the more you want it. The older you get, the more you appreciate not having it, without a doubt.
Certainly.
But we did here. I don't know what the climate is down in Albuquerque. I don't believe you get the kind of snow we get here, but this year, very little. Of course, we got a lot of mountain snow. But our winter, outside of the week before Christmas, which dumped about 4 or 5 inches, that was it for the whole year, at least where we live. And then just a couple of weeks ago, we got about 3 or 4 inches, but it was gone in a day because our temperatures pretty much from the first of the year have been in the 40s. And we actually saw 70 last month, and it's been in the 50s and 60s. So we're taking a little dip next week, but then right back up into the high 60s, low 70s. Today's 71 degrees. I mean, it's unbelievable out there.
Yeah, well, it's funny. The snow pattern here has been pretty similar this past winter. We got a little bit more than what we did last year, which wasn't hard to beat. We didn't get too much, but we do get, winter snows pretty regularly. But I'll tell you, today was not the first day of the season I had to turn on the air conditioning. So it's been on the warmer side. While everybody is trying to thaw out back east, it seems a little unfair. I've got to run the AC, but sometimes the grass is always greener on the other side. But bottom line, I think most people would take what we've got here.
Oh, I totally agree with you. Again, like I said, the older that I get, the more I really appreciate this type of weather. But all in all, can't complain. I know as I mentioned when I first started, I saw a little program on the other day on the Weather Channel, them talking about California with the problems with the drought. Depends where you are. We may see a super drought. We may see some real critical things. So as much as it's nice to not have the snow and rain and make the winters easy, I think it's just a necessity. And we're I know here in Utah, we're down quite a bit, not into a critical zone by any means, but people don't think about it. As soon as it gets nice out, I mean, in my neighborhood today, sprinkler systems were running and people are fertilizing. I don't like to entice it quite this early yet, but they do, and again, we got to think about those things because getting a drink for ourselves, I think sometimes a little more important. I know it's more important than feeding the lawn.
That's right, and fortunately, there are a lot of things you can pick from with lawns and plants to be, heat and drought resistant and that kind of thing. But I do have some lawn care plans for tomorrow, and but the drought story that you're talking about is, it's really concerning because it seems pretty severe. And as far as New Mexico goes, generally we've been in the worst drought already that we've been in since, I think it's been the worst since the late 19th century. I mean, that's how bad it's been. Now, the past year's gotten a lot better. But if we're looking at next year, like you're saying, I mean, that's going to be really serious because we're down quite a bit already.
Yeah, we definitely need the moisture, without a doubt. It is definitely critical for sure. Well, I gave you a little bit of I gave our listeners a little bit of a rundown as far as your bio, Dan. But I found your website interesting and kind of your past interesting, and we're going to cover a lot of different topics tonight. But for our listeners, why don't you give us a little bit more of a backstory, a little bit of detail of kind of maybe some things you did in the Army, and I know I'd like to talk about some of those things. There's some things you're going to talk about, and some things we can't. And I totally understand that.
Sure.
But would like to let our listeners hear a little bit about you.
Well, sure. Yeah, you're right. There are some some things that I can't really go into detail about regarding my intelligence work for the government, and I can explain a little bit later why. But basically, kind of the general backstory on me is I was a veteran. I was in the U.S. Army for a few years out of high school. Served as an MP. And both in Germany at the time, which actually the Germany at the time would have been West Germany. It was during the Cold War, and later served at Fort Hood before I was then discharged and went on to have, pursue my academic interests and things like that. You mentioned the Russian studies degree. That was my first bachelor's degree that I earned. I actually started off as a history major, but ended up focusing at the time on Russian studies because I just really found it really interesting, the history as well as the contemporary relevance at the time, and ended up specializing in that, and thought about grad school, but ended up actually then going and getting a political science degree, and fell into some museum work, and then ultimately ended up working in the post 9/11 period for about 10 years as a senior intelligence analyst for the government. What I can tell you, I'm not comfortable actually disclosing the name of the agency, mostly just for privacy reasons. Sure, and the fact that it's been less than a year ago since I left. But I will say that as an analyst, the work that I did revolved mostly around cybercrime and terrorism. I wish I could say I had my hands on the X-Files, but that wasn't what I was doing. Mm-hmm. But it did revolve around cyber and terrorism cases and things like that. And for me, in terms of my writing, especially with Truth Insurrected, the St. Mary Project, and other things that I'm working on that are upcoming, actually that work, and a lot of my experience too in other ways, but in particular, the work that I did as an intelligence analyst really plays in nicely, I feel, or helps me to be a novelist, because to me, well, as an analyst, obviously details, facts, authenticity, accuracy, all of those things really mattered. In fact, a lot of times there was potential for having, lives depending upon this, or other significant assets and things like that. So in my writing, I try to carry that same kind of obligation to be detail-oriented, to sound authentic, to try to be accurate. And so that's a big boost, or a big connection between that work and what I do as a writer. There are other things. Now, for example, Truth Insurrected, my debut novel, is, it's a modern-day conspiracy thriller. It's centered on UFO disclosure. Mm-hmm. I can tell you, though, one of my upcoming works is based very heavily on my experience as an analyst in the cyber and terrorism fields.
We definitely want to pick your brain a little bit, but not get you in any disclose anything. But the whole topic of disclosure is so interesting, Dan. I mean, it's so many people have so many different opinions on it. Of course, everybody in general, I mean, kind of the general consensus is that everything is stifled by the government, and we can get into that. We can get into that conversation a little bit. But let's talk about your book first. Truth Insurrected, the St. Mary Project. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it? What's it about? Give us some highlights.
Sure. Well, it's like I said, it's a modern day conspiracy thriller centered on UFO disclosure, and in fact, its backdrop, and we can talk more too about my interest in the subject itself of UFOs, but its backdrop is very much drawn from modern day UFO lore, or the modern day sort of UFO storyline, everything from Roswell and aliens, both living and dead, perhaps in captivity and so forth, and Men in Black, Area 51, the role of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and so on. And so people have described it kind of like a X-Files meets Tom Clancy, which I really like because I was a big fan of the X-Files and have always enjoyed the adventures that were written by Tom Clancy. But basically, Truth Insurrected, the St. Mary Project, it centers on a character by the name of William Harrison, who is a former FBI agent, and he has become a private investigator in Tucson, Arizona. He begins to receive mysterious messages or cryptic messages from a person who signs the name Echo Tango, in other words, E.T., basically. And what it does is it draws Harrison's attention to something that begins to shape up that's beyond anything he ever thought possible, which is a deadly government conspiracy to cover up alien and UFO contact, basically. So that's kind of the setting for the story, and I've always pictured it as a trilogy. So, you know, I certainly am working on or starting to think about sequels and so forth, but this one very much, I wanted to really be kind of an homage to UFO, the UFO topic as we think of today. Now, obviously, it's a very diverse topic, can't touch on everything in the book, but what will happen, hopefully happen in subsequent books, in the sequel and so forth, it'll go much beyond that or deepen some of the discussion of some of those topics. But, yeah, so basically, it's, like I said, people have described it as an X-Files meets Tom Clancy.
Ah, does your character in the book, does he or she or they or them, do they are they searching for extraterrestrials, or is it something that they just kind of stumble into?
Well, now it's interesting. So they're as far as the main protagonist,
without
William
giving it away, so people buy it.
Yeah, definitely. And believe me, I'm used to skirting the. I don't want any spoiler alerts going off during this conversation, but the William Harrison has no real, interest in this subject. However, the book actually starts off with him doing his work as a private investigator, and he happens to have a UFO sighting. And there's some significance to it, which I won't disclose because I want people to read it and get into it. But that's about the only connection he has to this subject before he gets drawn in. And what's really interesting about Harrison is that when we meet him, he's this former FBI agent. He's had sort of a tragic past with the loss of his parents when he was still in school and so forth. And he ends up leaving the FBI because he's actually injured. He's shot and has an injury that prevents him from continuing on with being in the FBI. So when we meet him in the book, he's somewhat lost, and he's somewhat searching for something to bring some real meaning into his life. And what happens is, and this really isn't giving away anything, is obviously he begins to go on this trail of this case that's unique for him, number one, but he also begins to sense a real injustice taking place. And this relates back to the disclosure issue, is that as the case builds and as he begins to become more involved, he really sees it as not so much an issue of extraterrestrials and UFOs, but an issue of accountability on the part of our government. He is an FBI agent. He's someone who thinks from a very legal point of view, but he's also a person who wants to get his hands dirty and do the work that needs to be done to bring justice. And the other thing that happens that is somewhat of a twist, but really drives the reason he gets involved in the first place, why he's picked by this informant, is that he discovers there's actually a really powerful secret about himself and his family that could turn out to be the key to unlocking this deadly cover-up.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. Now, plenty other characters in the book that are very much connected to the subject, and in fact, for those that follow the UFO subject, they'll recognize the term or the phrase, Majestic 12 or the Majestic Group or whatever.
Right.
There's a group of characters. In fact, the St. Mary Project is a group of characters who I sort of modeled after Majestic 12. I wanted them to be represented in the book, but I didn't want to be locked into the whole, this is what we know about Majestic 12, therefore you can't go beyond it. I just gave it a different name, gave it its own kind of backstory, but it's very much modeled on the alleged group that was, brought together by Truman and has secretly studied and perhaps exploited the contact and the technology and so forth. So there's a real mix, and I like to think of it as a book that if you're interested in the subject, that you'd enjoy, but also if you like a good conspiracy thriller, you're not necessarily interested in UFOs, but you like a good conspiracy thriller, that it would also be appealing.
Where can our listeners get your book at, Dan?
They can, of course, Amazon has it all. Amazon has the Kindle edition, the paperback, and the audiobook, which just came out a couple of weeks ago. The paperback is also available through other online retailers like Barnes & Noble, and I think Books A Million even has it now. There are starting to be some brick-and-mortar retailers that are starting to carry it, but mainly you want to look for it online, and a good place to start would be Amazon.com.
And pick it up. So your plan is, again, to put several books out in the series?
Right. It's funny, this is my very first book, and the funny thing is I actually wrote it initially about 20 years ago, and it's only taken me until now to publish it, anyhow, life gets in the way sometimes. But like I said, when I was originally writing it, I did actually picture it as part of the first of a trilogy, and I've actually started outlining and pecking out some things for the sequel, but actually I'm on to some other projects now. I'll have a sci-fi book coming out that's the first installment of a sci-fi series called The Outworlds, and the initial book is called War Torrent, and it's a alien sci-fi adventure in the 24th century, and it'll be coming out as well as several others before I even get to the sequel. And what's funny is that each of these ideas that I have for books are turning into series. Like I've got the Outworld series that I'm working on. There is the cyber crime thriller that I'm working on, which should be, my goal is to make that a standalone piece, and that will be coming out next year. But in the meantime, I've got the Outworlds series coming out, and the start of what will probably be a series as well called Richter's War, which is about a private investigator in basically late 30s, early 40s Los Angeles, who is getting involved in kind of fighting World War II, but on the home front. And it's an homage to, I love the old, like Maltese Falcon and Glass Key, the Dashiell Hammett type novels, and so it's kind of a tribute to those as well. So it seems like whatever I write, it tends up being the start of something, a trilogy, a series, or something along those lines, which really isn't unusual these days.
Well, I've got 3 books, Dan, that are all penciled up. They just need to get finished. It's a series. It's a very fun, simple read, and I know how it is. There just doesn't seem to be enough time in the day to get things done. But when you have the time and yeah, like you did, after 20 years, mine are not 20 years old, but they're about 4 years old. And I actually started writing them from the middle. Well, actually, the one book was written from the end backwards. The other 2 were written from the middle outward. And just a lot of fun. I need to get them typed up and created and get them into some form of print. But it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
You should. And, starting in the middle, writing backwards, whatever works, frankly. I mean, it is, it's nice to outline stuff and think ahead and all that. And, there are stories of authors who would develop thousands of pages of backstory for characters before they even started writing.
Right.
I can't do that. I'm more of a let's take an adventure and see what we discover kind of writer. I applaud anyone who can, plan like that. But yeah, good luck with that. I mean, it is. Life can get in the way, or time flies. And, just this afternoon I had to laugh because I was planning to do some writing and did some, but I was distracted any number of times by reruns of the Nostradamus Effect on H2 channel, so I kept tuning in to watch about Armageddon and so forth, which is one of my fascinations too, all of that. But so anything from just simple distractions to life itself can derail you.
It gets in the way. And the thing is like for me, the approach I took for writing mine, and again, I need to just finish them up and clean them up. I actually started, as you mentioned, about trying to build the backstory for a handful of characters. Mm-hmm. I tried to write the thing, and I looked at other books with the he said, she said line all the time, trying to figure how do you get the feel for someone to read this. And I mean, my interpretation of reading a book is almost like watching a movie, except you're reading the print.
Yeah.
And trying to discern between the characters, and I ended up going to. I looked at some old English, early literature books back in the 40s and 50s on how to write books, and one author talked about how he storyboarded the whole book with pictures and cartoons, and that was the route I went. And then every handful of cartoons became a different chapter, just with stick figures, of course. And it just, it's been a lot of fun. So like I said, I just need to wrap it up and put a bow on it and get it out there. But again, life takes so much time. But, one thing that's interesting is, we have a lot of, while our show covers so many different facets, I mean, we go all over the place from ufology to paranormal to one of my favorite subjects is serial killers, everything, old B movies. Matter of fact, I'm in the works. I'm trying to get the famous actor Don Knotts. I'm trying to get his daughter on the program to talk about her dad, her famous dad. I mean, just we go all over the place. But one thing I find with researchers like yourself, even though you're an author, most people that write ufology, books that deal with ufology, even if it's a story, even if it's fictional, those people may not be your mainstream ufologists, if you will. They may not be your Richard Dolans or your Stanton Friedmans, but most of the people like yourself, and even me to some degree, because you want to have some significance to the book, I think a lot of people like yourself, you do more research than some of these other people do. Maybe you're not a known out there as far as, there's Daniel P. Douglas, the ufologist, but you find that, you dig in, and I find that fascinating. And there's been a lot of authors on the program that know as much as these mainstream ufologists know. They maybe don't do the convention circuits and all the other stuff, but they dig into the history, and it is amazing for something that supposedly doesn't exist, if you want to go by the government's rendition of it.
Right.
Boy, there's so much stuff out there, and there's a lot of credible stuff out there.
There is, and it's interesting you bring up that point. I was just thinking, you're right, and for me, fortunately, I've had a lifelong interest in this subject. So when I started to write it, there was already a lot, there were already a lot of books that I had read, a lot of documentaries and things like that, and of course that has continued over the years, and it's been interesting to look back over the last 20 years too, to see what's changed in the subject or in the kind of the storyline. We hear a lot more now about underground alien bases and things like something that we weren't really hearing about 20 years ago, and so it continues to develop its own content, so to speak, and sort of sub genres as a legitimate topic or whatever. But give you an example, the research is really important. Like I said, when I was doing my intel job, obviously I was dealing with a lot of looking at a lot of information data and trying to get it right, and because you needed that to base conclusions on and all of that sort of thing. And when I write, I'm trying to do the same thing. There's a short story of mine that's going to be in my publishers. They've got an upcoming, Geminid Press is my publisher, and they've got an upcoming short story anthology, 21 different stories. And the short story that I wrote for that, it's a short story, so we're not talking about very much to the writing, word length, and all of that. But I did quite a bit of research on that. It actually, the main character in that story, by the way, is the main character of the upcoming Richter's War series. The character's name is Gino Richter, and he's this private investigator in L.A. And anyhow, it's a short story involving him, but it revolves around the 1942 L.A. UFO incident, the one
right.
Where there was all the gunfire and anti-aircraft
right.
shells being fired at supposedly a wayward balloon of some sort. Anyhow, I did quite a bit of research on just getting the information right on that subject, and also about the time period too, because it's not just about that UFO. It's also about a guy who's living in Los Angeles in the late 1930s, and I wanted to make sure I had a sense of what clothes were they wearing, what did it look like, and all of those kinds of things come into play. So no matter what your subject is, if you're doing your job right as an author, you're going to learn things that you never knew before, and you've got to do that to be authentic.
Well, you do, because anybody, especially if you want people that, I guess if pardon the expression, but if you want the intelligent reader to sit down and pick up the book and place it, and your story is written at a time or place in history, you want it somewhat historically correct.
Correct. Yeah.
It just gives credibility to it.
Yeah, and I always have to laugh, though. I think it was, I can't remember who this was, a philosopher or a writer, but he said that, the big difference between fiction and reality is that fiction needs to make sense.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Fringe Radio Show. Our friend tonight, Daniel P. Douglas, is on the line again. Dan, thank you so much for sharing your Saturday evening with us.
Oh, hey, you're welcome. It's my pleasure.
We were talking a little bit before the break again about the credibility of the time zones, of of history and some stuff like that. You want to pick back up again with what you were saying? Yeah,
well, I was just saying how, and again, I can't remember who said this, but that big difference between reality and fiction is that fiction has to make sense, and it's so true. And when you're writing, or at least when I'm writing, I want to make sure the way I make sense of it is to, again, get details right, get information. Of course, imagination plays a big part in all of this too, but it plays it differently, and I think that you just have to to be a good writer, you have to kind of write from what you know.
Right.
And if you don't know, then you can maybe go so far with your imagination, but it's just gonna, it's probably gonna fall flat. So I try to avoid that by, reading and learning as much as I can about subjects that I care about. I don't ever plan to write a novel about some shape-shifting billionaire or something like that. I don't really care to. There's plenty of those stories out there, but
sure.
Not my interest. But UFOs, sure. Detectives, yeah, I love that stuff. And so when it comes to writing about those things, I want to make sure I have information.
Well, living in New Mexico, Dan, of course, you've got Roswell. I don't know how far Albuquerque is from Roswell, but is that, it's interesting. I think that Roswell, in many cases, put New Mexico on the map at a very early time, and of course, White Sands, all the different testing and stuff. I mean, New Mexico's kind of known as one of those states where a lot of things have gone on. What's the local flavor there? People think it's funny, it's a joke, it's recognition. Do you get a sense of that?
You mean in terms of like the UFO subject in general? And, of course, everybody knows about Roswell, and I think if you were to have people, in fact, they've done this. I mean, you see cartoons all the time, and if it has anything to do with New Mexico, there's usually an alien involved. And, I think people take that in stride. There's very... people here tend to be fairly open about what some people might call fringe subjects, which it's what they call them, but are very serious subjects like UFOs. The interesting thing to me about New Mexico is it does have this very long history of, or at least much of the 20th century and into the 21st century, this history of technological, being on the edge of technological advancement and achievement. I mean, this is where they detonated the atom bomb, before we dropped it on Japan. And you have, of course, the very large array in all of the national labs here, Los Alamos and so forth, and White Sands, as you mentioned. So, to me, it's not surprising that, if in fact a alien craft crashed somewhere, crashed anywhere, that it would have been in New Mexico. I mean, we have a lot of interesting things going on in this state, and it's kind of interesting too, because if you look at the statistics, it's not extraordinarily high, but per capita we have a higher sort of rate of sightings. There's only a couple of million people in the state, so the sightings that get reported to MUFON, for example, for people here in New Mexico, I think there's probably 70 to 80 sighting reports per year from New Mexico to MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, which is, a busy weekend in California or Texas or something like that with larger populations. But per capita, it's a slightly higher than average rate, and I'm not surprised. I don't think our UFO history or lore here in the state influences. In other words, I don't think people are wacky, nutty UFO people here in the state. I think it's just a state that is aware of its UFO history, which is, that's the other thing too, is you don't just have Roswell, but we just had the 50th anniversary of the Socorro incident in 1964 with Lonnie Zamora. Perhaps even a more compelling case in terms of evidence and witness reports and things like that than Roswell, at least equally compelling. There are other reported incidents too in the state. So it's just it's just a very interesting state to live in for a lot of reasons, including its UFO history.
Right.
Yeah.
Have you been to Roswell? Have you gone to the? My wife and I, we've talked a couple times about going down there for their big event. I guess it's a pretty big deal there, and it brings all the locals out, and of course it's quite a UFO convention.
Yeah, it brings together a lot of different people. Some of whom are from Earth.
Right.
But it's big doings down there. I have been through the museum. It's been actually quite a while since I've been through the museum there, which is, my recollections are very interesting, and I'm sure that's changed quite a bit since I've been through. I have not been down to the festival. I have been to Roswell for different things, sightseeing and so forth, but haven't been to the big festival yet, and it's one of those things that's on my to-do list now that I live here in New Mexico.
You got to get down there and be a part of it.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, your book would fit right in there.
It would, and I think a lot of people are starting to hear about it here in the state. I was pretty lucky. It's gotten really nice reader reviews and critical reviews as well. From the critics, which is really so nice to hear as a writer, that people like what you're doing and cites and things about your work that really impress them and so forth. But it was really funny recently. There was a story about it on one of the local TV news stations, and that was really neat. So people are starting to hear about it. The other big thing, the big news, and this is more, takes it outside of the state of New Mexico, is was really honored about a week and a half ago. I don't know if you probably heard of Forward Reviews. They are very much sort of part of the publishing industry in terms of doing reviews and actually highlighting the work of independent authors and independent presses and things like that. Well, they just announced their finalists, as they do every year, for their what they call their Indie Fab Book of the Year awards. And lo and behold, Truth Insurrected is one of the finalists. And that, to me, just I already feel like a winner. I don't care if I get a prize or not, but to have it be named a finalist by Forward Reviews in their Indie Fab Book of the Year award contest is just really gratifying. But so it's starting to get attention, in the news, online, and we're, I hear from fans online. It's starting to spread, and I just really, it's neat. Writing could be such a solitary thing and a lonely life. It's nice to hear from people and to see it get the attention that I think it deserves.
Well, first of all, congratulations on falling in that category. I mean,
thank you.
That's the big thing there. Of course, is that again you've got people looking at it and taking the time to go through it and maybe highlight through it, and I think that's a huge accomplishment.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it was a surprise and it's very gratifying. So I'm pleased to be in such good company. A lot of other good books that they have named as finalists. In fact, I'll just, if I can mention my publisher for a second.
You sure can.
Geminid Press, LLC. They're a new independent press here in Albuquerque, founded last August. And since that time, Geminid Press has published 3 novels, one of which is Truth Insurrected, the St. Mary Project, and 2 other novels. They're both urban fantasies. One is called The Arrow, and the other is called Keeper Chronicles, Awakening. And you know what? Those 2 novels are finalists as well. So Geminid Press must be doing something right, because the 3 novels that they've published since they were founded are all finalists in this Forward Reviews Indie Fab Book of the Year program that they have. So it's really wonderful.
Well, that's good. Gives them a lot of credibility.
It does, and it makes me feel good. Of course, they've been just great to work with from day one anyways, so it's nice.
Well, again, in being in the, again, I've never written a book, but I can imagine, and again, with many people that I know that have, that's a big swimming pool to be in. I mean, there's so many.
Yeah.
It seems like with authors, there's people that do it because they love to do it. There's people that are making very good money. One of the guests that we've had on the show, author Marie D. Jones, she gives talks all over the country on ufology and all kinds of subjects. She constantly is putting new books out. Yeah. It's a full-time job for her. It's a career, and I see her Facebook posts, and we've had her on the program. And while she goes and gives talks all over the country, she doesn't have much time because she's always got another one in the hopper. And I want to do it because it's fun and it's enjoyable, not because I'm forced to do it. I would say to do it as a profession, it's got to be a tough go.
Yeah, and that's where I'm heading, or hopefully heading, is to be able, with the support of my wife and my kids, my family. I'm actually trying to work on writing full time, but it's really interesting. When the publishing world has changed so much in the last several years, and in terms of being an independent author working with a independent publisher, I'm amazed at how much of my time as a writer has to be devoted to the kind of promotional marketing side of things.
Right.
And how books are successfully sold, has changed quite a bit. So much of it revolves around what they call the inbound market, the internet market, the people who are searching for books online or on Amazon. Amazon is more than a bookstore; it's really a search engine. The people that are searching for books, those are they need to discover you, and so much revolves around search engine optimization and all of these things, and it's changed dramatically in the last 5 years, 10 years. And so trying to understand all of that and play my part in making it work, because I feel obligated to help, not just write my books, but sell them as well. It's very time consuming. You've got to love what you're doing to be able to do that. Now, there's nothing wrong for writing for, writing's sake. I love anyone who can, or give my hats off to anyone who can sit down and just simply write for the joy of writing. I am trying to do that, but also, I'll be honest, try to make a name for myself and have an impact on subjects that I care about, and the only way I can do that is to get the word out, and that means a lot of responsibility. I'm curious, what are these books about that you've written, or that you've
Oh, my books, they're just they're actually just simple reads for young people, and they kind of cover uh, they kind of they're a culmination of me doing this. Me and my wife doing this. My wife and I, rather, better spell correctly before I write a book. My wife and I doing this radio show and putting it together, and it just some fun stuff for people who want to take a little look at ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal stuff. And it's kind of told from a different perspective, and a lot of character drawings in them. A good friend of mine already did the artwork for me, and again, just simple stuff. No, 120 pages, easy reads. Should just be a little bit of fun, and kind of fits an age category of I'd say probably addresses anyone from about the age of 8 to the age of 80. So it will even be good for kids just to talk a little bit on the subject. And one thing that I've talked about so many times is that, and let's just talk ufology, if you will. Kids today, the young children, the young people of today, they're pretty smart. They're all. It's amazing what an 8 or a 9-year-old can do with a cell phone or Facebook or whatever. I think it needs to be controlled. I will state that. I think some of these kids are a little too deep into the social media. They need to get out and fly a kite or hit a baseball or do whatever. But the kids read a lot. They're smart. They're very well educated. And they see these different subjects and topics, and I don't think there's anything wrong with presenting some of these fringe topics to our young people. Not that many years ago, and I'm sure with you being in the military, some of this stuff, you just didn't talk about it.
Right.
They'd put you in a straitjacket. You weren't supposed to talk about those things. And I think people are becoming more open-minded, and children. I think if they ask questions, what is a flying saucer? What is an ET?
Yeah.
Whatever. Don't say, well, that's the cartoon or whatever. Or if they saw something in the air, if they saw something strange, why not at least give them the option to take a look at it and make some of their own decisions?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's interesting how, well, to give you an example, I know someone who is a field investigator for MUFON here in New Mexico, and there was a kid, probably about the age of 10, we estimated, contacted him and asking for information about UFOs, and it was hard to find really anything. I think his goal was to find maybe a book or something on the subject, and they should. I mean, there are books about ponies, there are books about cars, there are books about space and things like that, for young ages, and these topics that let's face it, I think part of why I wrote Truth Insurrected was because I'm so frustrated and frankly fed up with the stigmatization of these subjects and the stonewalling and everything else. And if we hope ever to get at a serious study of this, or even some inkling of the truth, we need to just get over ourselves.
That's right. That's right.
Trust that we can handle this information.